I never imagined that my life would be shaped by a family conflict so deep that it would follow me for years. When I was younger, I believed family was permanent. I thought no matter how difficult life became, family would always be the place where understanding lived. I believed arguments would eventually end, wounds would heal, and love would always find a way back. That belief guided almost every decision I made as an adult, and it is the reason I ignored warning signs for far too long. At the time this story began, I was 36 years old. I had a steady job, a marriage I was proud of, and a family that, on the surface, seemed close. Holidays were loud. Birthdays were celebrated together. Photos on social media showed smiles and warmth. People often told me how lucky I was to have such a united family. What they didn't see was what happened after the smiles faded. The conflict didn't begin with shouting or confrontation. It began with discomfort. Small, quiet moments that didn't feel right. Conversations would stop when I entered the room. Family group chats went silent after I asked certain questions. Plans were made without telling me, and when I found out, I was told it wasn't intentional. I tried not to overthink it. My wife noticed the changes before I did. She would ask why my siblings seemed distant or why certain relatives avoided eye contact. I brushed it off, telling her families go through phases. I told her stress makes people act strange. Deep down, though, I felt something tightening in my chest every time we visited my family. The tension became impossible to ignore after my father passed away. Grief has a way of revealing people's true priorities. What should have been a time of unity turned into quiet competition. Discussions about responsibilities slowly shifted into debates about control. Conversations about honoring my father's wishes became arguments about who deserved what. Money was never openly mentioned at first, but it was always present. You could feel it sitting in the room, heavy and unspoken. I tried to be the peacemaker. I reminded everyone that our relationships mattered more than anything material. I suggested compromise. I encouraged patience. Instead of bringing us together, my efforts seemed to isolate me. Suddenly, I was seen as someone who was in the way. Phone calls became shorter. Messages were carefully worded. When I asked direct questions, I received vague answers. People spoke around the truth instead of addressing it. That uncertainty was exhausting. I felt like I was constantly trying to read between the lines, searching for meaning in half-finished sentences. One night, after another tense family gathering, my wife asked me a question I couldn't answer. She asked me if I trusted my family. I wanted to say yes. I really did. But the words didn't come. That silence scared me. Not long after that, I discovered that decisions were being made without me. Important ones. Choices that affected all of us. I learned about them by accident, through a conversation I overheard. When I confronted my family, they told me it was easier that way. They said I would have complicated things. That was the moment I realized I was no longer seen as equal. The emotional distance grew quickly after that. Every interaction felt tense. Every word felt measured. I began to doubt myself. I wondered if I was being too sensitive. I questioned whether I was imagining the hostility. Gaslighting doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's simply being told you're wrong when you know you're not. The stress followed me home. It affected my sleep. It affected my mood. It affected my marriage. I became withdrawn, replaying conversations in my head late at night, wondering what I could have done differently. My wife tried to support me, but I could tell she was worried. Family conflict has a way of spilling into every corner of your life. It doesn't stay contained. It changes how you see people. It changes how safe you feel. The breaking point came with a message I was never supposed to read. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't cruel. That's what made it worse. It was practical, calculated. It talked about me as if I wasn't a person, but a problem that needed to be managed. Plans were discussed. Outcomes were predicted. My reactions were dismissed before I even had a chance to speak. Reading that message felt like losing my breath. I confronted my family the next day. I expected denial. I expected anger. What I didn't expect was how calm they were. They justified everything. They told me I was overreacting. They said I should understand why they did what they did. In that moment, I understood something painful. They had already moved on emotionally. The arguments that followed were unlike anything I had experienced before. Old mistakes were dragged up and exaggerated. My intentions were questioned. My loyalty was rewritten. It was as if years of shared history were being edited to fit a new narrative where I was the villain. What hurt the most was how easily they let go. I tried one last time to repair things. I reached out privately. I apologized for any pain I may have caused, even if I didn't fully understand it. I asked for honesty. I asked for respect. I received silence. That silence stayed with me longer than any argument ever could. Eventually, communication became formal. Messages were short and distant. Everything felt cold. Family discussions were replaced with boundaries and conditions. I felt like I was negotiating with strangers instead of people I grew up with. The emotional toll was heavy. I felt grief, anger, confusion, and exhaustion all at once. I mourned relationships that were technically still there but emotionally gone. I mourned the family I thought I had. There were days when I questioned my worth. Days when I wondered if I was unlovable. Days when I considered giving in just to restore peace. But every time I imagined doing that, something inside me resisted. It took months before I accepted the truth. Not every family conflict has a resolution. Not every relationship is meant to be saved. Sometimes, loyalty is demanded instead of earned. Sometimes, love becomes conditional. Walking away was the hardest decision of my life. Letting go felt like failure at first. It felt like I was giving up. But as time passed, something changed. The constant anxiety faded. The mental noise quieted. I began to sleep again. I began to think clearly. Distance gave me perspective. I realized that I wasn't wrong for wanting fairness. I wasn't selfish for setting boundaries. And I wasn't broken for choosing peace over chaos. My marriage slowly healed as well. Without the constant tension, I became present again. I learned how deeply family conflict can affect the people who love you, even if they aren't directly involved. Today, my life looks very different. There are fewer family gatherings, fewer messages, fewer familiar voices, but there is peace. There is stability. There is emotional safety. I learned that family doesn't always mean protection. Sometimes, the deepest wounds come from the people who know us best. And sometimes, choosing yourself is the most courageous thing you can do. If you're listening to this and dealing with your own family conflict, I want you to know something. You are not weak for feeling hurt. You are not wrong for expecting respect. And you are not selfish for walking away from situations that damage your mental and emotional health. Healing doesn't always come from reconciliation. Sometimes, it comes from acceptance. From letting go of what you hoped people would be and seeing them for who they truly are. And sometimes, losing the family you thought you had is the beginning of finding the life you deserve.